Hi everybody, it's Mary Rowe from the Canadian Urban Institute. We're really pleased to welcome you back to City Talk. This is our second this week, and we have another one tomorrow. We had a slight time change. Appreciate those of you that were able to pay attention to that, to see that that in fact we are 30 minutes later today because one of our participants had a council meeting she had to accommodate. This COI, Canadian Urban Institute's in the connective tissue business. We're about how we actually maintain connections across the country and how we actually learn from each other and have the kinds of appreciations for what everyone is dealing with. And that's why we have participants here drawn from different municipalities and cities across the country. As we were trying to do with each of these city talks, we try to make sure that we've got representation from across different places. As many of you know, we've put up some platforms since COVID. One is citysharecanada.ca. One is citywatchcanada.ca, and this is a third, citytalkcanada.ca. They're keeping track of what municipal governments are doing and what everyone else is doing. We power these with partners and volunteers from across the country. And so we encourage you, if you've got some bandwidth and some spare time, if you could put an hour in or half an hour and you can help us watch or track or share, that would be great. Email us at covidresponse@canurb.org. covidresponse@canurb.org. This program originates in Toronto, and Toronto is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee. And the Wendat peoples and it's now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis folks from across Turtle Island. And we also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, which was signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, which were signed with multiple Anishinaabe nations. And we are very cognizant of that and the traditional territories in which we reside. And I'm sure that my other panelists will probably acknowledge their own attachment to the First Nations that they are indebted to. These conversations are intended to be candid, and people participate here as individuals. So even though they may work for a particular municipality or an institute or another, or they have clients, we always say at the outset of these that people are speaking to us as individuals. So they're free to do that, and we encourage them to do that, recognizing that they have a constituency that they represent or that they're accountable to. The other thing that we're cognizant of is that these conversations are taking place in parallel while we still have thousands and thousands of Canadians who are on front lines, many who work for the municipalities that are represented here, on the front lines doing emergency services and saving lives and trying to keep people healthy. And these conversations are in no way intended as a substitute for that or to supplant or interfere with those services. We've been very conscious at CUI to be supportive of the existing networks that were in place to respond to the crisis. And in fact, these folks, many of them work for municipalities that's exactly what we're going to talk about, is the financial toll that's taken on all the first line services that municipal governments are responsible for providing in Canada, and what are the implications of that. So, and the conversations are very much structured around what works, what's working, what's not, and what's next. And they're practical, grounded in the practical. So we've always said to our panelists, we hesitate getting too involved in prognosticating or sort of speculation. We really try to stay grounded in the real, and these folks are all grounded in the real, and that's why we're so appreciative to have them joining us. Talked about individuals. There's a chat function here. So if you look on the screen, you'll see that you have the capacity of people that are dialing in, that you can engage with the panelists, but you can even more importantly engage with each other by typing into the chat function. And we hold the chat function, we continue to keep it, and then we glean from it, and sometimes we post some of it back up on City Talk. Some of you may have seen that, because some really interesting things are posted on the chat, and I'll keep an eye on it and filter it back into the panelists, but feel free to respond to one another. And on your chat function, you'll see there's an option for you to choose whether you want to send a message to panelists or to panelists and everyone. We're going to encourage you to send it to everyone, because there may well be somebody on the chat who can answer more quickly the particular question you have. The other thing that we're finding with the chat is that people are putting up resources there. They're putting up links to articles and books, and we've had all sorts of things. So as this team starts to give us suggestions, staff will, whatever they pop out, staff will post it onto the chat function. Unlike in Vegas, where things stay in Vegas, if you put something up on that chat, it lives forever. So just be conscious of that, that whatever you put up there, it's going to be seen by whoever, and it's going to be seen for a long time because we keep them. As you know, we're recording, so this discussion that these gals have with each other will be posted on City Talk, Canada.com/City Talk in a day or so. And we also are pulling highlights. So every brilliant thing they say, we will summarize somewhere and you'll see it again. You can watch it again. You can share it with your colleagues. If you've got people that didn't have time to tune in at this time, you can send it to them and encourage them to watch it again. So it's midday here in Ontario. It's slightly earlier on the West Coast. We appreciate that people accommodate different time zones. This is just the beginning of a conversation. Not only will the chat live on, we'll post it, but also you, those of you in a parallel universe on Twitter, can tweet on this, #CityTalk. I'm not going to give you detailed biographies for each of the folks that are on the call today, because we usually just post a link on the chat function so you can look them up. These are esteemed people, and I would be, just dropped my pen, it would take a lot of the panel for me to go through their bios. But it won't be lost on you that this is an all-female session. And in the preview, Enid Slack said that years ago, she was on a panel with all women, and they were affectionately referred to as the Tax Chicks. So we've got Tax Chicks 2020. COVID tax chicks, I guess. And I'm going to ask them each at the outset to just give us a primer, a couple minutes on what are they seeing, what's going on in their particular jurisdiction or their particular purview. And then when they're done that, then we're going to have some conversations about the immediate situation, the challenge that everyone's facing right this minute, and then what are the implications over the next couple of months, and then over, obviously, into a few more years. So let's go all the way across the country. If we could first, we have from Burnaby, Noreen Kassam. So start us off, can you, from the west? We'll go from west to east. Noreen, we're keen to hear what you can tell us. And we see those hearts behind you, which is a very positive thing to have behind you. So welcome, Noreen, to City Talk.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I do have a little bit of a script just to get me started, and then, but definitely we'll have more conversation as we move along. This is an unprecedented time, and it has brought about unprecedented situations. The financial implications to local governments resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic are severe. For the city of Burnaby, facility closures, including recreation centers with pools and skating rinks, libraries, and cultural centers, have translated to millions of dollars in lost revenues. Unanticipated costs related to the pandemic are well beyond normal spending patterns. The pandemic is forcing a financial crisis that local governments will have a difficult time recovering from. Loss in revenues and additional expenditures has forced the city of Burnaby to lay off hardworking and committed staff. We are continuously looking at ways to reduce costs by adjusting operations and canceling or deferring needed projects in the community. However, these acts are not by any means slowing the financial drain. In addition to the permanent loss of revenues, there are imminent risks to cash flows related to the delinquency of property taxes and utility fees, which are the primary sources of funds that sustain local government operations. Covering local government funding losses through future property tax increases will not be a viable option, given the significant impact it would have on households, businesses, and nonprofit partners who are trying to weather the economic downturn and recover themselves in the coming years. In mid-April, the BC provincial government mandated some measures around delaying penalties on property taxes for businesses to October, which is later than normal for when we collect our property taxes. As well, local governments have mandated for us to continue to pay our other authorities earlier than normal. To allow for payments before receipts of funds, the government has lifted restrictions for access to legislative reserves. While this access will provide short-term financing, most reserves have been carefully built over time and are focused on the renewal of aging infrastructure that are currently well beyond their useful lives. These measures place collection risk in the near term and hardship in the future to replenish our reserves. Collectively, local governments in BC are lobbying the provincial government and federal governments for grants to cover COVID-related revenue losses, as well as the expansion of provincial property tax deferral programs. Lastly, local governments are doing even more with less. The vulnerable populations, specifically the homeless and seniors, are struggling in the communities during this time. Programs previously offered by other levels of government have been downloaded to local governments. It will take time, senior government support, and prudent financial management to recover from this adversity. Thank you once again for the opportunity to share my comments with you today.
Thanks, Noreen. Well, we're going to follow up on a lot of those points because, of course, Burnaby is part of a region, and we want to hear about how that's going to get sorted as well. So let's now go to London, if we can, please. My hometown, just saying, where Kelly Paleczny, let me just say it right, Kelly Paleczny, as I said, from my hometown, and dealing with a lot of challenges on the transit system. So Kelly, we're keen to have you and keen for you to give us a picture of what you're dealing with.
Thank you, and I'll start the conversation speaking more generically in terms of transit systems across the country.
Sure.
Essentially, I think the easiest way to say it is public transit services have been turned upside down during this period. All of the metrics that we've historically relied upon to make sure that our systems are operating effectively and efficiently, things like maximizing the rides per service hour, relying on recovering at a minimum of 50% of our operating costs and passenger fares, and ensuring that our operators provide exceptional customer service have essentially all been abandoned during this period, just in order for us to continue to be able to operate. Many of the systems across the country have moved to rear door boarding. That was done in an effort to protect our operators, from and provide for social distancing. But what that's resulted in is our inability to continue to collect fares. And the ultimate effect of that is a nationwide shortfall of approximately $400 million per month. So that's not small money that we're talking about, and that's going to affect municipalities across the country. Systems have also attempted to limit the number of passengers on buses, again, to provide for that social distancing. What that means is that's further impacting the efficient ways in which our systems have traditionally operated. And the last piece I'll say in terms of an intro is the move to rear door boarding has essentially eliminated the customer contact with the operators. So that whole customer service perspective has also essentially been eliminated, which is tough. We're in the customer service business, and we've lost that face-to-face, that frontline, connection with our customers, and that's something that we know is critical, and will certainly be critical going forward as we try to attract riders back to the system as we map our way out of this situation.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, well, 400 million a month. That's a bit of dough. Yeah, extraordinary. Okay, let's go to my namesake, Mary Persson, who's in the city of Edmonton, and whose mayor tweeted a little beauty tweet saying, listen to her, she's pretty darn smart. Glad to hear, Mayor. I have some things to that, Mary. We're happy to have you. Tell us what you're seeing in Edmonton. We're really interested in your perspective.
Thanks. So in Edmonton, we've been moving from merely running the city, we think, to running a city in crisis. So in and amongst other organizations that are running their organizations, be it public sector or private sector, in crisis. But we are still providing essential services and trying to prioritize those based on safety and helping our residents adapt to this pandemic as best we can. I really try to refrain to call this the new normal, because it's a very strange new normal if it is. We've taken a lot of steps to maintain public health. Some have been a result of provincial directives, and some on our own. So things like the closure of rec centers, the road closures for pedestrian spaces to space further out. A real problem with our homeless shelters and us having to step up with a local, we don't like to call it, but it's a field hospital at the Expo Center, which is one of our convention centers. But with all of that, the financial effect has been immense. If we get back to normal by mid-September, which is the model we're using right now, though we do have 3, we are going to lose over about $160 million in revenue alone. And the total financial impact will be approximately another 100 million by the end of the year, just with that slow return to recovery. And you'll see that the the FCM has asked, they said that all cities are going to lose between 10 and $15 billion. So I truly recognize that Edmonton's not alone in this boat. We've also, like Burnaby, we've had to lay off very hardworking people. It's temporary layoffs. It's out of respect for the taxpayers. But we've also been redeploying people, homelessness, transit, emergency services. We have been trying to help our citizens through property tax deferrals, rent and lease abatement or deferrals at this point, and trying to balance that with a capital stimulus program to keep people at work. So COVID has been a big hit to our community, but we are trying measures to prevent the spread, and we think it's working. We actually have fewer cases than other cities and areas in our province. And we are very happy with our residents who are trying to follow the rules and continue to proceed with their lives as normal, but while respecting the physical distancing. So this has been a collective effort on behalf of citizens, the cities, and the provinces. So
yeah, it has been. It's sort of an all hands on deck thing, isn't it? I mean, everybody has to kind of do their bit, take one for the team kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to come back to a number of things you've raised, but let's go to Enid Slack, who's at the University of Toronto with the Institute for Municipal Finance and Governance. Enid, big picture, tell us, what are you seeing?
Well, I think the picture that you're hearing from the other panelists today is very real. Municipalities are facing enormous fiscal pressures because of COVID-19. I think on the one side of the ledger, they've got expenditure increases and changes, but the biggest hit's on the revenue side. But just on the expenditure side, you can hear all the things that transit systems and cities across Canada are doing. And, you know, there's increased costs for public health, for social services, particularly in the Ontario case, emergency services. Municipalities are changing their IT systems so people can work at home. There's, of course, personal protective equipment, PPEs that they have to buy, more cleaning of buildings. So there's a lot of expenditure differences. At the same time, there's expenditure declines because some facilities aren't open, libraries, recreation centers, so there are some savings there. The real pressure, though, is on the revenue side. You've heard that many municipalities are deferring property taxes. What does that mean? You get a property tax bill, and the cities are saying, well, you have 60 days or maybe 90 days to pay that bill. There'll be no interest, no penalties. So the municipalities are losing the interest and penalty income, but they're also not getting the property taxes right now. And they're doing the same with water bills. Transit revenues, as we've heard, are way down because of ridership being down. So huge pressures on the revenue side, pressures on the expenditure side. And as you know, in Canada, as in most places, municipalities are not allowed to budget for an operating deficit. In other words, they have to budget for a balanced budget. And if something happens, like what happened in 2020, there is a deficit, they're required by law to pay it back at the beginning of the following year. And so municipalities are scrambling to figure out how to fill that deficit. And we can talk about some of the ways they're doing that.
Thanks, Enid. Okay, well, Noreen, isn't BC allowing BC municipalities to do something different? I thought they were allowing you to run deficits, correct?
They're allowing us to access our restricted reserves, and that is to help with short-term financing. They're allowing us to do some additional short-term borrowing, but eventually that all has to be paid back. And in the end, we're going to be taking from our reserves to, as Enid said, prepare, have a balance in the end, because there's no way we can have a deficit per se. And even if there is borrowing that flows into the next year, you have to pay it back pretty much right away. The borrowing from our capital reserves, they have allowed us to have a 5-year time frame in order to pay them back, but it's still not considered a long period of time. And as I mentioned earlier, how are we going to pay that back other than getting it from the taxpayers at some point, right? Because our major sources of revenues are taxation.
Yeah, I mean, this is the same. Go ahead, Enid.
I think, it's a short run, long run scenario, as Noreen is talking about. There's a cash flow problem right now, and these solutions will help with that. But that money does have to be paid back. And I think people have to understand that when you borrow money, a municipality borrows money, it has to pay it back. And next year, you're going to have people who are just getting back on their feet. They're going to have to pay their deferred property taxes, and now they're going to have to, also pay maybe increased taxes because of this borrowing. It's a short run, long run problem. In the long run, it's going to affect fiscal sustainability.
So I just want to go back to, sort of the basics in terms of where your money's going, and then why are you so lacking in money right now? And then we'll talk about the fixes. So your money is being drained by, some of you would have had fiscal challenges probably before, correct? Or you were or were you all flush? Were all the municipalities across the country just humming along fine before this happened?
No, not necessarily. I mean, the push is always to keep property taxes as low as possible, right? So you're already into some sort of a crunch. You have to have, you're trying to put money away too for replacement of assets at some point that need to be replaced. And so, no, it's ongoing pressures. But right now, with the added loss in revenues, with the pressure to help residents and businesses, reduction of property tax rates, deferrals, that's just adding to the pressure even more.
Like we're just bumping it down, we're kicking the can down the road, right?
That's right.
That was the main concern around the rental subsidies, that initially the federal government's solutions on rent were that loans, and small businesses were saying, wait a sec, we'll never recoup the dough. So in terms of what municipalities are doing themselves, so you're laying off, you've presumably reallocated resources, because we've heard stories about planning departments going and working in shelters, and so staff are being redeployed in certain cases, correct? And are there other than layoffs, Enid hinted at this, are there some services that municipalities have gotten themselves out of so that they can save money on that side? So recreation stuff, I suppose, right?
With the closure of our facilities, we've definitely reduced our services to our citizens, but we're also delaying hiring. We're reducing costs in areas wherever we can. As you mentioned, the layoffs, we're trying to postpone projects that we would normally be spending on at this point in time. So there are quite a few measures being taken in order to weather the storm.
What about in Edmonton? Are you having to reallocate money? Are you deferring capital projects, for instance?
So we have consciously decided not to defer any capital projects. Though we have taken some money out of our capital, we want to cash manage that. There's naturally some delays in capital projects, so we're going to use a little bit of that cash management buffer. But basically, we have actually had some very long conversations with council about reductions in services. So not opening up some services, the turf management, like changing the street sweeping, all those types of things.